Thank you very much for joining. I'm Sean Meehan. I'm the host of the book club today. I'm here to talk to the author of The Human Experience, John Sills. I've been interested in customer centricity and customer orientation for my entire career. And I've studied it, I've written about it, and I've strong opinions about it. And I read pretty much everything that comes out on this topic. And a lot of what I read, I'm very entertained by, and I find not so incredibly insightful. And this book, and the reason that I invited John to come on the book club, is that it's a very insightful and actually a very provocative book when you think about it. So I want to make sure that we don't just have a superficial understanding of the content of the book, which I really would love you to read, but actually I want to go deeper also into the implications of what John's talking about. John, of all of the things, and I know a lot about your work, and I'd encourage you to tell our listeners about that. But also, why did you land on this particular part of everything that you do to write a book about? What was the trigger?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And hi, everyone. Thanks for dialing in. It's great to see so many people around the world. And as Sean said, so I'm John. I'm managing partner at the foundation. We're a consultancy that helps organizations to create customer-led success. I've been doing this a few years. And before that, I was at HSBC for 12 years, working globally, actually, in a number of the countries that are represented here today, looking after customer experience. So like Sean, this has been my interest for 25 years since I was on a market still in Essex. And so I guess there's a long-term interest in terms of really caring about what matters to customers. But the trigger for me was actually about 4 or 5 years ago. I was on a holiday with my wife and my son in the UK, where we live. And we had a day out on one of those beautiful old steam trains. And you'll kind of know the type I mean. It had like deep leather seats you could kind of fall back into, nice oak panel tables to spread your picnic out on, someone coming down the middle of the aisle, handing out freshly cooked food and drinks. And my son said to me, he said, "Oh, Daddy, is this what it's like when you get the train into London every day?" And now I don't know about where you are in the world, but in the UK, no, that is not what it's like getting the train into London every day. I'm kind of lucky to be stood up in someone's armpit with a cold, wet sandwich that I've paid kind of a lot of money for. And it got me thinking, I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because surely the sign of progress is that you make things more efficient, but you keep the level of quality at least the same. And over the past 20 years, we seem to have really perfected this functional experience with all the new technology we've had to play with, being able to do more things in more ways, more quickly than ever before. But I think maybe we've done that at the loss of the emotional experience, the human experience, the thing that actually I think really matters to customers. And organizations now have this kind of tin man feel to them from the Wizard of Oz. They've kind of got all the different, parts they need to function and move, but they're lacking the one thing that probably really makes a difference, which is that heart. And that's, I think, led to organizations that are now full of humans that aren't allowed to act in a human way. So that was the trigger. And that then set me off on this path of 2 or 3 years of researching organizations that have done do this well. Organizations like Octopus Energy, when you phone up Octopus and you're on hold, you get played a song that was number one when you were 14 years of age, because they respect you being on hold. They respect the time you're spending. So you start to see these examples everywhere of organizations that have managed to retain this humanity, even in a world where things are becoming more digital and less human. And so that's what drove me to then kind of write the book, because I think it's a really important topic at this moment and this time, that we don't lose sight of that humanity whilst we're embedding all of this other great technology.
So the idea is there, it's clear. But what should readers expect from the book?
Yeah, so in the book, I kind of cover three chunks to it, really, which, Sean, you never will kind of happened accidentally in terms of how these chunks ended up coming together, as they do when you're writing a book. So I start by talking about these 3 myths, and we'll talk about these, I'm sure, in the next hour. But the myths that I think get in the way of organizations create this great experience, myths of feedback and loyalty and return on investment. Then I kind of suggest what I think a really good human experience looks like. These kind of 7 behaviors that are a bit like the behaviors you would see if you were talking about your relationship with a partner or a friend. What does that really look like with organizations and customers? And then I spend most of the second half of the book talking about culture, organizational culture, much of which I learned, Sean, from your book with Charlie, the customer Copernicus, around how a real customer-led culture is built. And what I think are the things I see in these organizations that they all have in common, these traits they have in common that enable them to build this culture. I should say that happened accidentally. That wasn't planned, but I felt I should interview a few CEOs to find out how they managed to keep creating this human experience. And as I was interviewing all on Zoom during COVID, I had a little post-it on the side of my desk. And I was just making a note of all the things they had in common. And after about the sixth interview, I thought that's probably a better book, actually, writing about those things that talk about the culture that's behind it. So that's what the book covers. They're the different areas. And I'm sure we'll explore some of those as we go through.
But is the underlying contention that businesses perform better in the marketplace if they are more human?
Yeah, I think my argument is that businesses perform better, have a more sustainable success than organizations that don't have this approach. They're building on a much stronger foundation. Now, of course, you can be financially successful through being very product-led. You can make a lot of short-term profits that way. You can have a lot of short-term impact in the markets by being focused purely on product and burning through a high number of customers that are coming through. But I think it's very hard to build a long-term, sustainably successful organization that's on strong foundations if you don't create a great experience, because customers will start to leave you. They'll start to talk about you in a negative way. Over time, your reputation will be eroded. And like I say, Sean, in your book, you talk about kind of Tesco and EasyJet and O2, these companies that have really managed to build that long-term success through doing that. I think it's also worth saying it's better for your colleagues as well. There's really strong evidence that happy colleagues and happy customers go hand in hand. And if you have this approach that I'm suggesting and you let your humans be human, then your colleagues will be happier. That creates a more sustainable business on that side as well as your customer side.
If one of the triggers to write a book is that you think people need to hear this. And often the trigger for that thought is that you have negative experiences, and your book is full of negative experiences. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, say full. It's not. There are many negative experiences that justify then you talking about how it should be done. Given that there's, let's just say, plenty of negative experiences, and those companies are there and they're doing just fine. What's going on? Is this a segment issue? Are there some customers that want a human experience and some companies that are good at serving those segments? Are you saying that this is a universal construct?
Yeah, it's certainly not short of examples. And I suppose part of the downside of doing what I do and talking quite openly is that I end up becoming a bit of a funnel for a lot of these experiences. So my email and Instagram and LinkedIn, if someone has a bad experience, they kind of come and tell me about it, and it becomes quite cathartic for people, I think. And that gives a lot of the stories as well, because I'm interested in hearing what these stories are. I think the thing is that we, as customers, we perhaps don't always realize the experience we're having, and we don't always realize what the experience is that we should be having. I think, we've forgotten what it's like to have real human experience, real human interaction, because most of those experiences aren't like that now. If you look at banking as an example, we've kind of all just got used to and just accepted the fact that it's very complicated and it's quite hard to understand, and you don't really know what most of the language means in the letters you get sent. And we just kind of accept that as the way it is. And in the same way, we're now starting to accept longer wait times when you phone up contact centers, getting emails from do not reply email addresses. You can't actually contact the organizations you're trying to speak to now. And we just kind of accept it because we think, well, we're a bit powerless. That's not the way that we're able to work as businesses and customers. And I think that's what needs to be challenged. I think, people need to be aware that it's not good enough. It's not acceptable. Organizations need to be aware of that, because you're talking about customers' lives, really. Every day, organizations have the choice to do something that makes customers or people's lives a bit better, or do something that's going to create more stress and do something that's more damaging and do something that could make their life worse. And so I do think there needs to be that balance and that focus on doing this because it's the right thing to do. Now, to your point about, about whether it's not the norm at the moment. I think when you start to look across statistics that are outside of the business world, you start to see the impact this is having. So loneliness is on the rise, anxiety is on the rise, depression is on the rise. There's a huge amount of mental health issues on the rise around the world in every culture. And a lot of that is down to a lack of human connection. The number of people in the USA under the age of 21 that haven't spoken to another person face to face in a day has doubled in the last 10 years. So it has really significant impact. And I suppose what we're really trying to do, and what I'm trying to do with the book, is to make a bit of a stand and say, it might sound a bit grand, but kind of say, no, this isn't good enough, actually. And as soon as you start to surface these stories, loads of other people join in and go, yeah, I've had that experience too. And it's only once customers start to push back and go, look, this isn't really acceptable, and actually things could be better, things could be nicer, it's causing me a lot of stress, it's causing me a lot of anxiety, that's when we can start making a change with organizations and showcasing the ones that really do that properly. Just to pick up on Dennis's point, I've just seen in Zoom, it's a Zoom user, to Dennis's point about metrics, which I think might be interesting. One of the challenges with this is the way that organizations measure. So in contact centers, for example, you'll have average call waiting time. And the problem with those averages is it just kind of hides the extremes. So you go, well, on average, everyone's on hold for 5 minutes. That's okay. But you're not looking at the 10% of people that were on hold for half an hour or so. And we once tried to get one of the organizations we work with, one of the big energy companies in the UK, to change their measure of average call waiting time to human lives wasted. So to count up all of the minutes customers were on hold to them through the year and convert that into human lives wasted, just to really bring home the point of what being on hold actually does. They backed away from it right at the last moment because I think they saw the figure, and then it might not be so good. But yeah, long answer to your question, Sean, but I think, I don't think it's a segment thing. I think it is the norm across, that doesn't mean that people don't want different things at different times with different experiences, but broadly having humanity in an experience, which is different to humans, having humanity in an experience, I think benefits all.
So let's pretend for a moment I'm a financial director. Human experience, to state the obvious, requires humans, and I can get machines to do things. You talk about banking. Banks for the last 20 years or beyond have really funneled customers into doing things for themselves, electronically aided, so technologically aided. So the momentum has been towards dehumanization of processes. So I'm agreeing with you, but I'm also pointing out that was a deliberate act. I mean, it's a required act for the banks to be able to operate efficiently. And you could argue, in order for them to be sufficiently viable, to give customers choices. So, if I'm not viable, I go out of business, customers lose a particular choice. So how do I square the circle?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think there's a very subtle and significant difference here that's important to point out between humanity and human. So I'm not saying that we need to go back to a world where everything is done through humans and where bank branches need to reopen, because clearly there's been huge advances with the technology we've had that's created much more convenient experiences. It's enabled people to check their balances and make payments using banking as an example. And that's fantastic. You wouldn't want to go back from that. But there's two important points here. The first is that I think, humans need to be available when someone needs to speak to them. And that is still going to be, a big issue. And what we've seen is organizations trying to put barriers in the way of stopping you, like these chatbots, they're not really chatbots. They're more like guards, they're guards you have to kind of battle like through a video game. And if you get the right combination of numbers, like an escape room, you manage to work your way through and eventually speak to someone. So there's one thing that humans still need to be available to speak to you. The other thing is humanity in your digital products. And a lot of this, for example, is in, say, straightforward language. So again, you can use chatbots as an example. You can use automated emails. You can use the way things are written. Again, banking is a great example of this. There's still at one end, at the moment at least, a human that is still designing that process. And at the other end, there's still a human using that product or that process. So that humanity can still come through, even if it's digital. And like I say, I mentioned Octopus Energy before, they're pretty much online only. You don't really need to speak to someone at Octopus, but they have that whole music. They have a thing called the Wheel of Fortune, because they know how boring it is to submit a meter reading to have your gas and electricity measured. So every time you submit a meter reading, you spin the Wheel of Fortune and you get a chance to win some money. There's no human involved there. But what it does do is show a respect for the time that the person's having to take and just create a little bit of human connection. Now, to your point about the financial side of this, there's a whole other argument of the balance sheet, which is all about a thing that's called failure demand. The demand that's put onto your service as a result of your service failing. And this is partly what I talk about when I talk about the myth of ROI, the myth of return on investment. Because bad customer experience is really expensive to provide. Good customer experience is good for customers, but it should be more efficient for the organization. One company we worked with recently, 33% of all the calls coming into their contact center were repeat calls from people that had rung up the day before and not had their question answered properly. When I worked at HSBC, I did a complaint study of 20 countries around the world of how they handled and dealt with complaints. All of those markets had a measure in place for how quickly you have to respond to the complaint. All of them had a measure in place for how quickly you had to close the complaint. But when you spoke to customers, they actually said, well, within reason, I don't mind how long it takes to deal with the complaint, as long as I believe you've looked into it properly, and as long as you keep me updated. So rather than focusing on get it done quickly, which was leading to a 30% reopen rate of complaints, take your time, do it right, keep the customer updated. It feels like it's going to cost you more money, but actually it saves you money, because you're getting it right the first time. And that's that slight fallacy that exists there. You don't need to prove that customer experience is going to make you money. You show that if you get it right first time for customers and you treat customers well, they'll stay with you and they'll buy more from you. But also you'll save a whole load of money in rework and reopen problems and complaints.
Great. And I think that's one of the great values of the book. I think you argue these points so brilliantly. You also give us lots of good practice. You talk about systems, you talk about culture, you talk about enablers of the right behaviors and so on. Tell us a little bit more about this and just give us an idea of the practicalities here. If we want to walk away from reading your book and deciding, I want to do something about this, tell us about what's involved.
Yeah, so I think what we've seen and what I see with organizations that do this really well, we tend to call them customer pioneers, which is a term we got from your book originally, Sean. Organizations that really pioneer on behalf of customers, that really trailblaze on behalf of customers. And what we see in terms of customer experience is they all have the same three things in common. They all have a really clear vision of what their experience needs to look like. And I'll come back to that in a second. They all have a system that's in place to help them, really connect together how they're going to prioritize the areas they're going to focus on, rather than trying to be all things to all people, how they're going to assess and design, and how they're going to measure the experience they're trying to provide. And that measurement needs to link directly into the prioritization, not being on two different parts of the business. So they all have a vision, they all have a system, and then underpinning that, they all have these enablers, these cultural enablers that, again, I think we'll probably go into more detail a little bit later on. But these three things combined, the vision, the system, and the ways of working, that leads to the behaviors. And you don't need to enforce behaviors within your organization or within your people. If you've got those other three things in place, you can allow freedom and empowerment with your frontline team and trust those behaviors will come because you've got those other areas. On the vision part, I think this is the part that for me is the first step. That's the absolute first step that you really need to take. You have to be really, really clear on what the vision is for the experience that you are trying to create, not one that anybody else is trying to create, not a generic vision, not a vision that kind of links in with NPS, an NPS score or a particular measurement. The vision that you want to create that's different to your competitors and your alternatives. Someone mentioned Swiss Rail, so I might just tell the Swiss Rail story just so that person is happy. But just before, and this is the best customer experience I've ever had, just before COVID, I was lucky enough to be traveling through Switzerland for a project I was on, which was helping a company that does rail holidays, helping understand what their customers were really experiencing. So I was on the first 2 days of a 10-day tour through Switzerland. And it was me and about 30 octogenarians, because it's mainly older people that go on these trips. And as we were going through just left Geneva, the train broke down. It stopped and it broke down. And I was delighted because one of my colleagues was Swiss and had told me how brilliantly efficient Swiss Rail was. And so I was straight on my phone messaging her, telling her that, the train had broken down and it was brilliant. And it wasn't as efficient as she thought. And then something strange happened, which is the train guard came down and spoke to us and said, look, I know you're a tour group traveling through our country and the train has broken down. It's going to take about 15, 20 minutes to fix. You're probably going to miss your connection. And I'm really sorry about that. But I'm going to keep you updated. And when we get going again, I'll let you know what's going to happen and what needs to happen when you get to Zurich for your connection. Off he goes. About 5 minutes later, we get another phone call from the head of operations at Swiss Rail saying, look, thank you so much for traveling with us. I'm really sorry. I know that your train's broken down. I know the guard will look after you, but here's my direct number if you need any help at all over the next couple of hours while we get this sorted. About 20 minutes later, the train starts moving again. The train guard comes down and says, right, this is what's happened. He explained the situation, explained what the problem was and said, look, we are going to get into Zurich about 25 minutes late. You are going to miss your connection. This is the platform you need to go from, platform 14. That's where your next train will be. But it's quite a complicated station. It's quite a big station. So I'll have someone to meet you at the platform and take you around to the train. True to his word, we get into Zurich station. There's a member of staff already there with an umbrella. We all follow around. All 30 of us follow around the station, get to platform 14 where the train's waiting for us. They've already reserved a carriage for us on the new train because we had one reserved on the old train. And as we got on, they gave us tea and coffee vouchers for the inconvenience. Now, we ended up getting into our final destination about 25 minutes late. And those of you that are familiar with UK trains, if I get in to London 25 minutes late in the morning, I'm absolutely delighted, like I'm high-fiving the other commuters. That's a good day if I only get in 25 minutes late. And for me, the difference is one of ambition and one of vision. They've clearly got a very clear vision of the experience they want to create. And I'm not saying that will happen all the time, but a clear vision of what the experiences they want to create and real burning ambition to make that a reality, to take ownership for the outcome that their customers are going to have. They've made a promise to get us somewhere. If there's a problem, they're going to take ownership to make that as easy as possible, not just an announcement that says, sorry, we're delayed. Sorry for any inconvenience caused. So the vision system, the enablers, the ways of working, that's the components that we see in organizations that we think are able to then deliver this human experience. But it starts with that vision. It starts with knowing what you're trying to achieve. Then you can work out how you get there.
Where does it come from, this burning ambition? And therefore the vision?
Yeah, I think there's kind of, so 3 or 4 areas, and again, Sean, referencing your book here, but we're sometimes talking about burning this, you talk about burning this, and this kind of burning this either often comes from pain or fear or ambition. So pain or fear, as you would describe it, when the organization is in trouble and needs to do something differently, or is shortly going to be in trouble and so feels it needs to do something differently. And what's interesting when you look at ambition, it's slightly weaker than the other two. It does rely on people. It relies on leadership. And actually, when you look through my book, and this is something that I thought about after we'd spoken recently, most of the organizations in my book are small to medium size, so starting to get to that bigger corporate size. But most of them are still kind of founder-led, founders still there, or founders that have recently left. And I do think the organizations that do this really well, it very, very clearly comes from the top. So AO.com, who are a white goods manufacturer, deliverer in the UK, supplier is the word I'm looking for in the UK. A guy called John Roberts, who's their CEO, hugely inspirational, fantastic storyteller. He's only set, he finds it, and actually this is true for a number of the CEOs I interviewed, they find it bizarre and illogical that CEOs wouldn't want to focus on their customers. Most of them don't actually have a customer experience strategy as such, because it's just ingrained within the business to do this well. And it comes from those leadership positions. Now, John Roberts, the AO, they only have 2 rules as part of their customer experience strategy, which is treat everyone like you want your own grand to be treated and make decisions that would make your mother proud. That's it. They have a really empowered team. They give real empowerment, real freedom to their frontline team to make their own decisions of what they think is going to be right. But they're the two rules, grands and mums. And that's all John talks about, grands and mums. And you can see in all of these organizations that burning desire from the top down to have this ambition because it's the right thing to do. Because, of course, as a human, you want to make things better for other humans, but also commercially, you only make money from customers. You don't make money from the products. You only make money from the customers buying the products. So it's a logical thing that if you keep customers happy, they will make decisions to buy more of your products. So that's where it comes from. I think it's those really ambitious leaders and leadership teams that then really walk the talk, as well as just saying we should do it, but taking actions that suggest something else.
Are there any special challenges that arise when companies are growing? So these companies that you mentioned are growing. The companies in your book are growing, but they're SME, and they're beginning to be much larger organizations that probably need more bureaucracy, more systems, more procedures. Perhaps they take on more debt. Perhaps they have pressures from the outside around efficiency and returns and so on. What are the particular challenges that they face in keeping this ambition that they have that got them to that point?
Yeah, I think there's two big challenges that I see that start to create problems as the organization gets bigger. The first is connection to customers. So when you're a smaller organization, you're naturally more connected to customers. You're more involved on a day-to-day basis what's happening with your customers. And as organizations grow, more layers appear between the leadership team and the customers on the front line, and they start to lose that connection. Their connection, we talked about the epidemic of feedback requests, their connection starts to come through data, through surveys that gets converted into PowerPoints and PDFs. And if as a leader you don't like what's on those PowerPoints, then you can choose to question the methodology rather than accept the inconvenient truth. And that's what we see more than anything else. If it's slightly inconvenient truth on the screen in front of you, you'll say, well, was that the right sample size? Did we ask them on the right day? You'll try and excuse it away. So you can only really maintain that connection through real direct immersion with people, direct immersion with your customers. I'll just share a story on this before I go on to the second part. A few years ago, I was working with a food manufacturing company, and we were talking about the future of ready meals, the future of convenience food. And so as part of this, we went to interview and go shopping with customers. And I went to interview a lady. She was in her 40s. She was a yoga instructor. She said that she was really fit and healthy, really cared about her body, her appearance, would never use convenience food or ready meals, cooks everything from scratch. And when you're in her house, it kind of checked out. There was recipe books everywhere, ingredients everywhere. It made sense. And about an hour later, I went shopping with her in the supermarket. And we got to the convenience food aisle, and I thought, well, we're going to fly down here. And halfway down, she picked up a ready-made mashed potato and threw that in. And then she picked up a ready chopped red onion and threw that in. And I said, well, hang on, how does that work out with you not using, any kind of pre-prepared materials or food? And she went, well, I haven't got time to peel and chop vegetables. I'm not stupid. Anyway, so we carry on. I'm fairly chastised. We carry on down the shop and we get to the alcohol and the chocolate aisle. And I think, well, we're going to, you're not going to touch anything here because body is a temple. But no, she sweeps in a whole load of chocolate and a whole load of Prosecco. Like it was like supermarket sweep, just piling it into the trolley. And I said, well, how does that work out with your healthy lifestyle? And she said, oh, well, that's girls' night on a Friday night. That doesn't count. And it's fascinating because, people will only tell you the version of themselves that they want to believe, the story they tell themselves. They're not lying. They just don't always recognize that version of themselves, or it's not who they want to be. So it's only by really immersing with customers and really connecting with customers, you can get to what we call the thick end of the wedge in the book. You can really understand what's going on in their lives and be useful. So point 1 of 2 for your answer is connection. Organizations lose that connection. Leaders lose that connection with what really matters and start to become very inside out and only really focus on customers' opinions of their business, not what really matters to customers. Now, the second one is lack of empowerment. So as organizations get bigger, of course, they need to scale. And to scale, you need to do things in a more efficient way. You need to try and have more controls over how the business runs because you've got longer layers between the kind of leadership team and the front line. So there becomes more policies and more procedures. And this is all makes sense. It's understandable that you need these in place. But what started to happen, particularly over the last 10 years or so, is that these policies and procedures are starting to kind of reduce the amount of humanity that's enabled, that the frontline team are able to show, that started to reduce the empowerment and the freedom they've got to make decisions. And this is where you end up in that I would if I could, but I can't kind of scenario where both the customer and the colleague know it's a ridiculous situation where common sense can't be shown. I'll share a story on this, which you may have heard before, about a chair that I bought, a big yellow chair that I bought. So when I moved house about 4 or 5 years ago, I decided I wanted one of those really big reading chairs. I'd obviously temporarily forgotten I had 2 children, so the chances of me actually sitting and reading in it were highly likely to happen anyway. But I went to a local furniture store, and I was in luck. They had a half price ex-display furniture sale on, and I found this big chair that I really liked, half price. The only problem was I'd driven there in quite a small car with my wife and son, so loads of kids' stuff and car seats in the car. So I said to the guy, look, if I buy the chair, can I get it delivered? And he said, no, we can't do delivery on ex-display furniture. You have to arrange to get it collected yourself. I was like, okay, makes sense, fine. So I thought about my options. So I went back up to him and I said, look, can I take the chair outside to your car park right outside the shop? Can I take the chair outside, see if I can fit it in the car? If I can, I'll buy it. If not, I'll bring it back in. But he goes upstairs, asks his manager, comes back down. No, you can only take it off the premises once you've paid for it. Okay, can I buy the chair, take it out, try and get it in the car? If I can't fit, bring it back in, get a refund. So he goes upstairs, asks his manager, comes back down. No refund on ex-display furniture. I said, okay, can I buy the chair, leave it here for an hour while I take my wife and son home, clear out the car, come back and pick it up? Goes upstairs, asks his manager, comes back down. No, once you bought the chair, you have to take it off the premises immediately. And by now I'm feeling like I'm in one of those chicken, fox, bag of grain, getting across a river puzzles. There's an answer in here somewhere, but I can't quite work out what it is. And eventually I say, right, I'm going to buy the chair. I'll leave my wife and son here for an hour while I drive that home and then come back and pick them up. And he seemed happy with that, abandoning my wife and child. So I said to him, he was like 21, big and muscly, like everything I'm not. And I said, look, can you at least help me carry the chair out to the car? And he said, yeah, no problem at all. But I'm only insured to carry it as far as the door, because after that, it's your property. And true to his word, he carries it to the door and then puts it down, and him and his colleagues stand and watch while me and my wife, who's 4'10", struggle to get the chair over to the car while my son's playing chicken in the car park. Now, everyone that hears that story, you will know, and I'm sure everyone listening will know, that is a ridiculous situation. That is a ridiculous situation to be in. And ultimately, I'm a customer trying to pay money to the organization. And what's happening there is the policies and the procedures are getting in the way of what should be the right thing to do, of what the common sense decision is. And to your point earlier, Sean, it's a waste of money. It's a waste of time and money for that person to have to deal with me 4 or 5 times rather than just helping me work out another way of doing it. Now, interestingly, I told that story yesterday at an event, and someone came up to me and said, oh, that's interesting, because I had the same situation in the same shop, in a different, same brand, but in a different place. And they just got a little list of local delivery companies that they've made themselves, and they just give you that list and say, why don't you ring one of those and they'll help. So same policies and procedures, but a common sense approach. So that's the 2 things I think it's that we see as they grow: a lack of connection with customers, a lack of empowerment with colleagues. Those are the 2 things that you see as organizations grow that get in the way of the human experience.
I hope you enjoyed the chair.
My sons enjoy jumping up and down on the chair. Yes.
So John, tell us. Now you've touched on it essentially, but tell us a little bit about the myth of customer loyalty. I want to know more about it, and I know that several of the people who dialed in have mentioned this.
Yeah, it's probably the area of the book that I've had the most comment on, shall we say, so far. Makes it sound like thousands of people. It's about 3 people, and one of them is my sister. But I don't really believe that customer loyalty exists. I think what we're really talking about is usefulness. And as long as you stay more useful than your competitors, then customers will stay as your customers. So a few years ago, I used my local taxi company where I live in High Wycombe, and they were great. They were local, lots of lots of cars. You could pre-book, but you couldn't pay by card, and you never knew where the car was. Then this thing called Uber appeared, and all of a sudden I had a service that I could get a taxi on demand. I could pay by card. I knew where the car was, good prices. So overnight, I stopped using my local taxi company and I moved to Uber instead. And then about a year later, my local taxi company released their own app. And now I had a local taxi company that had loads of cars, good prices. I could pre-book and I could use my card and I knew where the car was. So I stopped using Uber and I started using Nils. Now, it might be I'm not a very loyal person, but I think the point there is, they just kind of started to get more useful. Uber was more useful for my taxi company, then my taxi company became more useful again. And anyone's listening that thinks, well, no, I am loyal to organizations. My question would be, well, if that organization you're thinking of tripled its prices and the quality of its product reduced by half overnight, would you still use them? Almost definitely not. Now, you might if you're getting some kind of social usefulness from it. And if you look at the likes of Apple and Tesla, there's a social usefulness there because using those products is a bit of a symbol to the rest of the world, who you are, what you care about. But even that usefulness only lasts so long. So say, for example, the CEO of Tesla decided to buy Twitter and set about kind of, completely destroying it and making himself look slightly awful in terms of the way he manages business and becoming very unpopular. Let's
just imagine.
Let's just imagine that situation happens. Then all of a sudden, owning a Tesla might not quite be as cool as it was before. Actually, if you look at the Tesla share price, it dropped from the moment that Musk announced that he was going to buy Twitter, in our hypothetical example. So I don't really think loyalty exists. Now, the reason I think this matters, because some people have said this is just semantics. I'm using the word usefulness. Organizations use the word loyalty, but it kind of means the same thing. But words have power, words have meaning. And I think my challenge is that, if organizations talk about customer loyalty, they believe, whether they mean to or not, they believe that customers are loyal, that customers are going to stay with them throughout. And therefore they focus on the onboarding. They focus on the start of the experience. So many organizations I work with say, look, can you help us map the onboarding journey? Let's get that bit really right. But then they stop trying. They stop trying to impress customers. They start taking them for granted. A guy called Joe McLeod has written a brilliant book called Ends that's all about endings in customer experience and how organizations do really bad endings. If you try and leave a broadband provider, you have to go through this hour-long interrogation to try and leave. It leaves a really bad taste in the mouth. So I don't think loyalty exists. I think usefulness exists. Loyalty exists with friends, family, maybe communities. That's why you see it with football teams or you see it with local, when there's local situations occurring that you want to be involved in. But we've really lost that with organizations. And if organizations can keep usefulness in mind, then they'll keep trying to be more useful than the alternatives. That's how you stay really useful and relevant to customers.
You talked about language and the importance of language there. Language is an element of our climate, our culture around us. Let's talk a little bit more about the culture. You tell us that this is an absolutely key component in in an enterprise that embraces human experience.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think when I interviewed these CEOs and studied, other organizations, it seems to me there's kind of five things that they all have in common. And this was really interesting to me. The first was this ambition. So they all had this really kind of burning ambition to want to be great for customers. The second was that they all had this connection, so this deep customer connection that I mentioned. A couple of examples of that. So City Mapper, which is the app that most cities have now to help you get around the public transport. Every time they move to a new country, they have a thing called the traveling circus. They take a cross section of their team to live in that city for a month, and they move Airbnb every 2 days. So they experience what life's like really traveling in that city, not just what the data tells them. Or one of the railway companies in the UK, Tour and Railways, they ask their senior managers to live along the route somewhere. And so they have to wear their name badges on the train. So every morning, they get direct customer feedback and direct experience of using their own service. And Alan Riley, the customer services director there, he said, look, the more formal the forum, the less I learned. The meet the managers, the focus groups, I never really got much out of those. I learned everything I needed to on the 732 from Princess Risborough to Marylebone. Now, they all have this ambition and they all have this deep, deep connection. They all have empowered teams that I've spoken about. And I'm enjoying the comments about the yellow chair. By the way, I did buy the chair. It's very comfortable, and it's great because of the story. That's maybe the best thing that's come out of the yellow chair. They all have these really, really empowered teams right through the organization, not just the front line, right through the organization. Now, the other two things they had that I think are really interesting are focus and perspective. And these are the ones that get talked about the least and might be worth just touching on. So they all had a really, really clear focus on the moments that matter. Again, not trying to be all things to all people, but what are the few moments that really matter to our customers with the experience that we're trying to create? How can we make those moments as great as they can possibly be? And also, how can we focus on the moments that our customers need us to be there for? Whether they're sad moments or happy moments, how can we react and respond to those particular moments on focus? And happy to talk more about that if useful. The other area is perspective. They all had a very broad perspective on the world. They all took inspiration from other organizations and other industries, and that's what trailblazing pioneers do. They presume they're going to be the best in their industry. They presume they're going to lead their industry. They're marking themselves against a different cohort. They're marking themselves against the best across industries, whereas most organizations just try and be as good as the competitors. And therefore, you get very slow-moving industries. Banking is a great example of this. No bank is ever really more than a few months ahead of any other. So that's focus on that perspective.
But let me interrupt there for a second, John. If as companies get good at this, as they manage to deliver great experiences, how do they measure improvement? Because at some point, thinking of the metric from the consumer's side. If I'm happy, I'm happy. How happy is very happy, and how do I get happier? So I'm imagining a world in which your advocacy for this issue is persuasive. More companies embrace the idea. They get on board. They get good at this. The standards go up and up and up. Fantastic for our economy. Fantastic for customers. But what do companies do then to measure and understand what the distinction is, and how can they differentiate in a world which will become populated maybe by more human experiences?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. So I think there's two elements to that. One is that I think measuring customer satisfaction only ever gets you so far. So I think it's kind of fine to have, but actually you can generally get a sense of how happy your customers are by using your own products, by looking at your email. Rather than sending out a whole load of surveys, just let people email you rather than having do not reply email addresses. If you let people email you, you'll get all the feedback you need and you'll give a better service rather than forcing surveys. So I think it's far more effective to measure just kind of business success. So actually your measure of are your customers happy is, are they buying more from you? Are they literally recommending you to people, not hypothetically recommending you to more people? And are you getting more customers as a result? So the measure for me of customer happiness and satisfaction should always be the commercial bottom line of, are you selling more products, making more money from those products, and having more people join you? So I think that's what I would measure. Now, the comparison question is interesting. Again, probably theoretical in the sense, because I think there'll always be differentiation. You're always going to have some companies that are better than others. I don't think we're going to hit this utopia that everyone does it well. But that's where it goes back to that point about your vision and creating your experience. And this needs to come from a combination of what matters to your customers. What are the strengths of your brand that you really want to build around? Where are the areas where you want to be different to your competitors and alternatives? And what do you think the future world looks like? What's it going to look like in 5 years' time? And how are you going to build towards that? And that will be different for different companies. And that's where you need to stay true to your vision and of the experience you want to create that might be subtly but significantly different to a competitor that from the outside might look very similar. Then it is a case of starting to set the future. And this is, again, what we see with trailblazing companies. They don't kind of wait for the future to happen and then try and deliver to that. They don't wait for customers to demand them. They set the experience. They tell customers, this is what a great experience looks like, and we're going to convince you of this, and then you're going to come with us, and everyone else is going to have to follow us. Amazon are the best example of this with Prime delivery and next day delivery. None of us knew we needed 24-hour delivery. Like, I was perfectly happy buying things, and then it turned up a few days later. And all of a sudden, no, I need 24-hour delivery. And anything that's not free in 24 hours is an absolute disgrace. Now, whether that's caused more problems than actually benefit is a bigger question that's worth diving into another time, probably, because starting to see real issues now, the number of returns coming in, the cost of that, the sustainability of that. I think there's a lot of issues about that. But great companies set markers. They set markers, they set what the future is and bring people along with them.
Thanks, John. Let's hear, we've got various questions. I'll start you with one that I think has come up a few times. And that is, what is the impact of artificial intelligence on what you're talking about, ChatGPT, all of this stuff that's such a buzz these days? You can't escape it. How does it affect what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, I think it's a fantastic technology to have as long as it can be harnessed and used in the right way. And I think it can hopefully help to make things more efficient within organizations, to give better functional support and answers to customers. And again, going back to my point, this isn't about humans, it's about humanity. So I think when you look at something like ChatGPT or Bard or any of the other AI services that are going to exist, hopefully they'll be able to help customers, in terms of getting quick answers to quick questions, in terms of being able to help explain the context of difficult situations. If you're a bank, you've got to be looking at this to see how it can help customers analyze their own spending, really help them make better decisions. Huge amount of benefit that can really help customers. Now, notwithstanding that still needs to be done in a human way. It still needs to have straightforward language. It still needs to have understanding. It still needs to have accessibility. It still needs to be consistent. These are all things that are human traits that still need to be built into it. It needs to show a definition between human and robot, because people don't like being tricked into thinking they're speaking to a human when they're not. So it needs to have a very defined role. But you still need those humans there, because there's still a time in customer experience when you want to speak to another person. And often that's because you want to feel like you've been heard. So it might be there's a big emotional moment that you need help with. It might be, and this will be really important when it comes to AI, you don't know what the right question is to ask. Because the challenge with AI is the curse of knowledge. You're going to need a certain amount of information. If you're talking about mortgages, for example, you're a first-time buyer, you might not even know what the right questions are to ask, first of all. You might want someone just to kind of bounce that around in. But the other thing is, if you have a problem, when you have a problem, you don't really just want to go onto a machine and kind of moan to the machine. You want to talk to someone, because you want that other person just to go, I'm really sorry about that. I hear you. I hear what you're saying. It's unacceptable. Then they might use a whole load of technology behind them to help get to the same answer anyway. So there's always going to be that mix. But even if it's through AI that is being delivered, it still needs to have that humanity in the experience around it, even if it's not a human doing it.
Mm-hmm. I'd just invite people to put their questions in, and I'll try to catch them as they come up. And John will keep an eye on that as well. In the meantime, what do you think is the future of customer experience, John?
Yeah, that's a nice small question. I think, so if I'm honest, I'd probably say the future of customer experience will be very similar to the past of customer experience, because most things don't change. There's a great, the earliest complaint from Babylonian times is a guy who sent a messenger through a war zone because he wasn't happy with the grade of copper that he'd been given. And that was 3,000-4,000 years ago. So, right through history, right through any kind of retail, there's always been very similar things. I found out recently that my great uncle ran a shop about a mile from where I'm currently sat, which I didn't know about. And I found an advert for it in a newspaper. And it said his mission was to make your casual custom permanent, which I thought I liked. That was 100 years ago. And a lot of that's true. If you look at a lot of company visions now, customer experience visions, that's all true. The basics of, you've got a person selling a product, you want someone to buy it. To do that, you want to have some kind of connection. It's got to be kind of good price. It's got to be good value. It's got to be good quality. You want to feel slightly special buying it. That will absolutely stay the same. You need to be accessible. You need to be consistent, responsible, straightforward. But as I say, you're going to get this balance of emotional and functional. And you're going to see, more of the functional stuff will go even more digital. And with AI, that's brilliant. You're still going to have that emotional element in. And it's just a question for organizations of where and when those humans are available and those people are available to be on hand to do that.
Do you think that retail branches will become history?
I really
Retail bank branches.
Yeah, yes, I think it's the short answer for banks. I think they will, because I don't think, frankly, I don't think banks see value in them. So I think they will, but that's probably they will as we know it. I think, there is a big advantage of still having a physical presence. And what I would love to see is very different in different countries around the world, but banks starting to come together to, have kind of one kind of bank premises that a number of banks can use. You should be able to do that now. We've started to see that trialed in a couple of places where 2 or 3 banks come together. It's almost been like a coffee shop. You've got kind of financial coaches in there, for example. So I think there'll be an iteration that could involve the banks coming together, or could be a third party that says, look, people still need financial coaching, financial advice. Let's get them together, give them a hub that they can come to and talk about those things. But I think, banks do need that physical space a lot less than I think some retail stores still do. So the demise will continue, but hopefully not completely, because there is a need for people to talk to people when it comes to financial services and matters.
Mm-hmm. John, what are you gonna do now? What's the encore? Is there another book in the works? Is there another topic that you think needs special attention?
Yeah, I've got a few thoughts. I'm separately, I'm trying to write a novel. That might be something completely different, but maybe I shouldn't say that out loud, because it might not actually happen. But I think there's 2 things that I found interesting as I've started to kind of have more of these conversations actually over the past kind of few months since the book came out. One is this thing around inequality. And I think there's something very interesting here in that everything I'm talking about and all of these stories about bad experiences, and I've been on the chat, there's some brilliant experiences, some really interesting points about customer experience and employee experience, actually, that I think is interesting too. But if you're rich enough, you don't have this problem. If you're rich enough, or you've got a good enough status, or you've got a good enough network, or you've got the time, then actually you often get a great customer experience, either because you can afford it to buy premium services, or companies offer you it because you're a premium customer, or because if you have a problem, the people that you need to talk to get it sorted, or how to write the letter to the CEO to get it sorted. Now, most people aren't in that position. Most people don't have the money, and most people definitely don't have the time. If you're a parent with 3 kids, you don't have the time to be doing what I do professionally and chase up organizations and write complaint letters and find CEO email addresses if you don't have the network. And that means there's a huge inequality here, because there's a slice of society that get great experience, and there's a big group of society that end up losing out with time, losing out financially, with money, as a result of this. So I think there's something there that's very interesting. We've started to look across different ethnic groups as part of that as well. So that's one thing. The other thing is it's just this broader question about relationships. I got asked this question this morning, that overall, we're just starting to really see this long-term deterioration of relationships between customers and organizations. There was this news article in the UK a few days ago that companies are now starting to kind of restrict the amount of returns you can have if you've bought stuff online, and because they believe customers are starting to defraud them. And we've kind of moved from the customer is always right to the customer is always wrong and probably trying to rip us off. And that kind of feels like what this experience is now, this relationship between customers and a lot of organizations. And that's hugely concerning. It's not good for either, this kind of parent-child relationship. And there's something there as well. So I might look in those 2 areas in a bit more detail. I think there's some richness there.
And if there was a silver bullet that would deliver customer centricity in reality to a company, the last question is, what would that be?
Yeah, I whether there is a silver bullet, I'm not sure, but I do. For me, I end the book by saying, if in doubt, be human. And I think that's a good lesson for any organization, that if you can try to let your people be people, if you recruit good people, and then if you can try and get out the way and let them be their natural, authentic human selves, you're probably not going to go far wrong. They might make some mistakes. They might get some things wrong. But going back to John Roberts and AO, mums and grands, generally good people are trying to do good things. Generally, people want to help other humans. Most people don't get out of bed in the morning and want to cause problems. So if you recruit good people and then let your humans be human, give them freedom, try and get back a little bit and let them be free. I think that's the closest you'll get and the most efficient you'll get to a silver bullet that can rapidly improve your experience you're giving to your customers.
John, and well, I should address everybody else. If you want to know more about what John's been talking about, if you want to dig a little bit deeper and really understand what exactly the facets of these are, with lots of examples, you will find the human experience not only insightful but also engaging and entertaining. Will give you lots to discuss with your own teams, and I would encourage you to if you're really interested in this topic, this is for me a must read. Thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you, John, for your time, and thank you for writing the book. And good luck, and good luck with the next one. It's been great to talk to you today. Bye-bye.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me on. Really liked it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.